The warning lights flashed red across the research station's curved walls as James Walker stared at his monitor in disbelief. 6 months into Earth's membership in the Galactic Council, and he was about to become the first human to encounter the most feared creature in known space. Warning: Class A predator detected in Sector 7. All personnel must evacuate immediately. The station's AI repeated its message for the third time. James watched his alien colleagues rush to their escape pods, their multiple limbs carrying equipment and personal belongings. The blue-skinned head researcher, Dr. Blue, paused at James's door. "Walker, we don't have room in the last pod. The backup shuttle will arrive in 6 hours. Stay in the secure room until then." Dr. Blue's translator crackled with static. "The Shadow Claw must not find you." James nodded, but his mind was already racing with possibilities. 6 months of studying alien life forms had taught him one thing: the galaxy feared what it didn't understand. He gathered his tablet, basic medical supplies, and research equipment. Instead of heading to the secure room, James made his way to the observation deck. The station's transparent walls gave him a clear view of the surrounding space. The stars' light reflected off the station's outer rings, creating rainbow patterns on the deck's floor. The security cameras showed something moving in the darkness. James enhanced the image, and his breath caught in his throat. The Shadow Claw was unlike anything in the Council's database. Its body was covered in what looked like living shadows, shifting and flowing like dark water. 4 powerful limbs moved with cat-like grace, and its long tail left trails of darkness in the air. But what caught James's attention weren't the creature's famous physical features. It was the way it moved. The Shadow Claw wasn't rampaging or destroying everything in its path like the reports claimed. Its movements were careful, calculated. James activated his recorder. Research Log 47. First visual contact with species designated as Shadow Claw. Subject shows signs of deliberate movement patterns inconsistent with reported berserker behavior. Current theory: previous observations may have been made under stress or threatening conditions. The station shook as the Shadow Claw made its way through the outer defense systems. James noticed something odd in the creature's movement, a slight favoring of its right side. He zoomed in closer. Update to Log 47. Subject appears to be injured. Visible irregularity in movement suggests possible wound on right flank. This may explain its presence in a populated sector, contrary to usual territorial patterns. The security systems began failing one by one. Most were designed to stop basic pirates or meteoroids, not one of the galaxy's apex predators. James could hear the metal groaning as the creature made its way through the station's halls. Instead of fear, James felt a growing excitement. Earth's history was full of misunderstood predators: wolves, bears, sharks, species that humans had first feared, then learned to understand. Maybe the Shadow Claw was no different. He pulled up the Council's data on his tablet. Every encounter with a Shadow Claw had ended in violence, but James noticed something. In each case, the Council species had attacked first, treating the creature as a mindless beast. Final update to Log 47. I am about to attempt something unprecedented. If my observations are correct, the Shadow Claw's behavior suggests intelligence far beyond what the Council recognizes. I will remain in the open, showing no aggressive intent. James set up his cameras to record what might be first peaceful contact with a Shadow Claw. The door to the observation deck groaned, metal twisting as something massive pushed against it. He took a deep breath and stood his ground. The door burst open, and darkness flowed into the room. The Shadow Claw stood in the doorway, its body seeming to absorb the light around it. Its eyes, glowing like distant stars, fixed on James. In that moment, as human and Shadow Claw observed each other, James saw something in those ancient eyes that confirmed his theories. There was pain there, yes, but also intelligence, curiosity. And so began the encounter that would change the galaxy's understanding of its most feared predator, all because one human chose to observe rather than run. End of Part 1. Time seemed to freeze in the observation deck. The Shadow Claw's massive form filled the doorway, its shadow-like body rippling in the station's lights. James remained still, his heart pounding but his mind clear. Years of studying Earth's predators had taught him that sudden movements often triggered hunting instincts. The creature took a step forward, and James saw it clearly flinch. The movement confirmed his earlier observation. The Shadow Claw was injured. Dark liquid, looking almost like oil, dripped from its right side. "You're hurt," James said softly, keeping his voice steady. He knew the creature wouldn't understand his words, but tone mattered with all living things. "I can help, if you let me." The Shadow Claw's star-like eyes narrowed, its head tilting slightly. James noticed how its tail moved, not in the aggressive whipping motion described in council reports, but in a smooth, almost curious pattern. Slowly, James reached for his medical scanner. The movement caught the Shadow Claw's attention, causing it to growl, a sound like distant thunder. James froze, then deliberately showed the device before turning it on. "Just a scanner," he explained, holding it up. "I need to understand what's wrong." The scan results appeared on his tablet, and James's eyes widened. Embedded in the creature's side was a piece of advanced technology, a hunting trap. The wound around it was infected, explaining why such a powerful creature had wandered into populated space. The Shadow Claw watched as James studied the results. Its body language shifted, becoming less threatening. It seemed to understand that James was trying to help. "That trap is illegal in council space," James spoke, partially to keep himself calm and partially because the creature seemed to respond to his voice. "Someone tried to hunt you, didn't they?" He took a careful step toward his medical kit. The Shadow Claw tensed but didn't move. Another step. Still no aggressive response. James reached the kit and opened it slowly, always keeping his movements visible. "I'm going to help you remove that trap," he said. "It's going to hurt, but it needs to come out." The creature's eyes followed his every movement as he prepared the medical tools. James knew he was about to do something either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. The council had dozens of records of Shadow Claws, tearing through reinforced walls and ship hulls. One swipe of those claws could end him instantly. But something in those star-like eyes told him he was right. This wasn't a mindless killer. This was an intelligent being in pain. James approached carefully, medical tools in hand. The Shadow Claw's body rippled, shadows dancing across its form, but it didn't attack. Instead, it slowly lowered itself to the deck, exposing its injured side. "Thank you for trusting me," James whispered, amazed at what was happening. He activated his recorder with his free hand. This would change everything the council thought they knew about Shadow Claws. The next few minutes were tense. James worked carefully, using his scanner to understand the trap's mechanism. The device was cruel, designed to burrow deeper if the creature struggled. No wonder the Shadow Claw had been unable to remove it alone. As James touched the trap, the creature growled again, its claws leaving deep scratches in the deck's metal floor, but it didn't move away or attack. James spoke softly the entire time, explaining what he was doing, just as he would with an injured earth animal. "Almost there," he said, finding the release mechanism. "This will hurt, but just for a moment." The trap came free with a wet sound. The Shadow Claw roared, its body convulsing, shadows whirling around it like a storm. James stayed perfectly still, holding the bloody trap in one hand and keeping his other hand visible. Slowly, the creature's pain subsided. It looked at its now free side, then at the trap in James's hand. With deliberate movement, it raised one massive paw and gently, so gently it barely touched him, pushed James's hand holding the trap aside. James understood the gesture. The Shadow Claw was showing him it could have attacked at any time, but chose not to. "You're welcome," James said, smiling. "Now let's get that wound cleaned up properly." The Shadow Claw settled back down, this time more relaxed. As James began treating the infection, He realized he was experiencing something unprecedented, the first peaceful interaction between a human and the galaxy's most feared predator. End of Part 2. 3 days had passed since James first treated the Shadow Claw's wound. The rescue shuttle was long overdue, and the station's communications remained strangely silent. But James barely noticed. He was too busy making the most important scientific observations of his career. Research Log 50. James spoke into his recorder as he watched the Shadow Claw examine the station's star maps. I've decided to call him Storm, after the way his body moves like dark clouds in wind. His intelligence continues to exceed all council records. Storm turned his star-bright eyes toward James, head tilting at the sound of his new name. The creature had stayed in the station, even though his wound was healing well. Each day brought new surprises. Storm shows clear understanding of technology. James continued recording. He doesn't just know how to break things. He knows how they work. Watch this. James walked to the station's main control panel. Storm followed, his shadowy form flowing like liquid darkness. James pointed to the star map controls, pretending to be confused. Without hesitation, Storm reached out with one massive paw. His claws, sharp enough to tear through metal, delicately pressed the exact sequence needed to zoom the map to a specific sector of space. Remarkable, James whispered. You've used these systems before, haven't you? You understand them. Storm made a sound, not the threatening growl from their first meeting, but a softer rumble. James had started to recognize different tones in these sounds. This one usually meant agreement. James pulled up the council's data on Shadow Claws on his tablet. Subject shows no sign of higher intelligence, he read aloud. Attacks appear random and driven by base instinct. Storm moved closer, his eyes fixed on the tablet's screen. James held it up so the creature could see better. They got everything wrong about you, didn't they? The Shadow Claw's body rippled with what James had learned was irritation. Storm reached out and touched the screen with one claw, pointing to an image of a destroyed ship. Yes, I've seen the reports, James said. Shadow Claw attacks on ships and stations. But that's not the whole story, is it? Storm moved to the main screen and brought up a different map. His claws traced a pattern through several sectors. James recognized them. They were all places where Shadow Claw attacks had been reported. Those are your territories, James realized. The attacks, they weren't random. Those ships were trespassing. The next few hours were a breakthrough. Through a combination of maps, gestures, and recorded images, Storm showed James the truth. Shadow Claws weren't mindless killers. They were guardians, protecting vast regions of space from intruders who would steal and destroy. The trap in your side, James said suddenly. You were attacking a poacher's ship, weren't you? Storm's growl confirmed it. He pulled up more images on the station's screens, ships that didn't match any legal council designs. James recognized the style of the trap he'd removed. These were illegal hunting vessels. Research Log 50 continued. James spoke into his recorder. I now believe Shadow Claws are not just intelligent. They're civilized. They have territories, they use technology, and they protect their space from illegal intrusion. The Council's assumption of them as mere animals has prevented any real attempt at communication. Storm watched him record, seeming to understand the importance of documentation. When James finished, the Shadow Claw moved to the door. Are you leaving? James asked, surprised to feel disappointed. But Storm wasn't leaving. He made a sound James hadn't heard before, almost like a call. Then he waited, looking at James expectantly. You want me to follow you? The answering rumble was clear. Storm wanted to show him something. James grabbed his tablet and medical kit. Research Log 50. Final note. Storm appears to be inviting me somewhere. Against all council protocols and probably basic common sense, I'm going to follow the galaxy's most lethal predator into unknown territory. But then again, he smiled at Storm. You're not really a predator, are you? You're something much more interesting. Together, human and Shadow Claw left the observation deck. As they walked through the station's halls, James realized he wasn't just making history anymore. He was rewriting it, correcting years of misunderstanding about one of the galaxy's most remarkable species. End of Part 3. James followed Storm through the dimly lit corridors of the station's lower levels. The Shadow Claw moved with purpose, his shadowy form guiding them to areas James had never explored. After a week together, their unlikely partnership had grown stronger each day. Research Log 53. James whispered into his recorder as they walked. Storm is showing increasing signs of what I can only describe as protective behavior. He checks the station's security systems regularly and seems concerned about my safety. As if hearing his name, Storm turned his star-bright eyes toward James and made a soft, rumbling sound. James had learned this particular tone meant something like, "Pay attention." They reached a sealed door, one of the station's old storage bays. Storm's claws moved across the control panel with practiced ease, and the door slid open with a hiss. James's mouth fell open at what he saw inside. The storage bay was filled with pieces of technology. Broken ship parts, damaged weapons, and various mechanical devices he didn't recognize. "Storm," James said slowly, "what is all this?" The Shadow Claw moved to a pile of twisted metal and began sorting through it. His movements were careful, almost delicate, despite his enormous size. He pulled out something that made James gasp. A data core from a ship. "These are from the ships you've stopped," James realized. "The poachers' ships." Storm made a sound of agreement and gently placed the data core in James's hands. James quickly connected it to his tablet. His eyes widened as information filled the screen. Research Log 53 continued. "I'm looking at proof of an organized illegal hunting operation. These ships weren't just random poachers. They're part of a larger group targeting Shadow Claw territories." Storm moved around the room, showing James more evidence. Each piece told part of a larger story. The poachers weren't just hunting Shadow Claws. They were stealing resources from their territories, destroying habitats, and killing other space-dwelling creatures. "You've been collecting evidence," James said with growing amazement. "You're not just defending your territory, you're gathering proof of their crimes." Storm's body rippled in what James now recognized as satisfaction. The Shadow Claw touched one of the ship parts, then pointed to his healed side where the trap had been. "The ship that hurt you, its parts are here too?" James asked. Storm led him to a corner where newer debris lay. Among the twisted metal, James spotted more of the illegal traps, identical to the one he removed from Storm's side. Research Log 53 Addendum. "The Shadow Claws aren't the monsters we thought they were. They're guardians, protecting their space from organized criminals. The attacks reported to the Council weren't random violence. They were law enforcement." As James recorded his findings, Storm suddenly tensed. His head turned toward the station's outer walls, eyes narrowing. A low growl filled the room. "What is it?" James asked, instantly alert. Storm moved to a nearby terminal, pulling up the station's long-range sensors. James watched as several small ships appeared on the screen, approaching from different directions. "Those aren't Council ships," James said, studying their signatures. "Their designs match the debris in this room. The poachers are coming back." Instead of showing fear, Storm seemed pleased. He made a series of short, sharp sounds that echoed through the storage bay. To James's surprise, answers came from outside the station, similar calls in the darkness of space. "You're not alone," James realized. "There are other Shadow Claws out there." Storm's eyes gleamed as he looked at James. The creature moved to stand beside him, his massive form protective rather than threatening. One huge paw gently touched James's shoulder. The message was clear. Storm wasn't just showing James evidence. He was inviting him to help, to be part of something bigger. Research Log 53. Final note. "I believe I'm about to witness coordinated action between multiple Shadow Claws. Storm isn't just sharing information with me. He's asking for human cooperation in stopping these criminals." James looked up at his friend. And yes, he could call Storm that now. And nodded. Okay, partner. Show me how I can help. As alarms began to sound through the station, Human and Shadowclaw stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy was about to learn just how powerful understanding between species could be. End of Part 4. The station's main hall buzzed with tension as 5 council representatives stood facing James and Storm. After 2 weeks of silence, they had finally arrived to rescue the stranded human. Instead, they found something that defied all their expectations. "This is impossible," said the lead representative, a tall being with crystalline skin. "Shadowclaws are mindless predators. They cannot be reasoned with." James stood calmly beside Storm, whose shadowy form seemed to pulse with annoyance at the word mindless. The evidence they had gathered was displayed on screens around the room. Ship logs, poacher data cores, and hours of recorded footage showing Storm's intelligence. "With respect, council member," James said, keeping his voice steady, "everything you think you know about Shadowclaws is wrong. I've spent 2 weeks working directly with Storm. He's not only intelligent, he's helped us uncover a massive criminal operation in council space." Storm moved forward, causing the council members to step back in fear. But instead of attacking, he carefully activated the main display, showing maps of his territory marked with poacher activity. "By the stars," whispered another representative, this one covered in iridescent feathers. "It's operating the technology with purpose." James nodded. "Storm and his kind have been protecting their territories from illegal hunting and resource theft. Those attacks you recorded, they were stopping criminals, not random violence." The evidence was undeniable. Video after video showed Shadowclaws specifically targeting ships that matched known poacher designs. Storm had even kept organized records of their activities, marking patrol routes and danger zones. "This changes everything," the crystalline representative said slowly. "If Shadowclaws are sentient beings capable of this level of organization, then the Council has been supporting the wrong side." James finished. "The poachers have been spreading false information, making the Shadowclaws look like mindless beasts so they could continue their illegal activities." Storm made a rumbling sound and touched a control panel. New images appeared. Dozens of wounded Shadowclaws, illegal traps like the one that had hurt him, destroyed habitats that had once been full of life. "These are their victims," James explained. "Storm's people have been trying to protect not just themselves, but all the life in their territories. They're guardians, not monsters." The council members huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. James felt Storm's tension beside him. Everything depended on what happened next. "Walker," the lead representative finally said, "you realize what you're asking. To recognize Shadowclaws as sentient beings would require completely rewriting council law. Their territories would become sovereign space. All current hunting permits would be void." "Yes," James said firmly. "That's exactly what I'm asking, because it's the right thing to do." Storm moved closer to James, his star-bright eyes fixed on the council members. Slowly, deliberately, he extended one massive paw toward them, not to attack, but in a clear gesture of greeting. The room fell silent. Everyone watched as the feathered representative stepped forward, trembling slightly, and placed her hand against Storm's paw. "I believe them," she announced. "No mindless predator could show this level of diplomatic understanding. The human is right. We've been wrong about the Shadowclaws." James smiled as he watched the other council members slowly approach Storm. Each one received the same gentle greeting, their fear gradually turning to amazement. "Research Log 60. James spoke into his recorder. The Council is finally seeing what I learned 2 weeks ago. Shadowclaws aren't just intelligent. They're civilized, organized, and capable of peaceful cooperation. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history." Storm made a pleased sound, his body rippling with satisfaction. He turned to the main screen one more time, showing something new. A recorded message from other Shadowclaws. Dozens of them, all working together to protect their space, all showing the same level of intelligence and purpose. There's so much more to learn, James told the stunned council members. Storm's people have been trying to communicate with us for years. We just never bothered to listen. As the council began drafting emergency messages to their headquarters, James looked up at his friend. Together, they had done what no one thought possible. They had bridged the gap between species and revealed a truth that would change the galaxy forever. End of Part 5. Warning alarms blared through the station just as the council members were preparing to leave. James rushed to the main control panel, Storm moving swiftly beside him. Multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, James announced, reading the sensors. 15. No, 20 vessels. Same design as the poacher ships in Storm's evidence. The Crystalline Council representative looked at the display with horror. They must have learned we discovered their operation. This is the largest poaching fleet I've ever seen. Storm's body rippled with dark energy, his star-bright eyes fierce. He touched the communication panel, sending out a series of deep, resonating calls into space. The response was immediate. Answering calls echoed from the darkness around the station. They're not just here to destroy evidence, James realized, watching more signals appear on the scanner. They're here for revenge. They want to eliminate everyone who knows the truth about Shadowclaws. The first shots hit the station's shields, making the whole structure shudder. The poachers' weapons were military-grade, far stronger than simple hunting equipment. The station's defenses won't hold for long, the feathered council member said, checking the systems. We need to evacuate. But Storm had other plans. He moved to the center of the room and made a sound James had never heard before, a deep, powerful call that seemed to shake the very walls. The next moment, something incredible happened. Dark shapes emerged from the space around the station. Dozens of Shadowclaws, their bodies like living shadows, moved to surround the station in a defensive formation. They weren't running away. They were protecting their new allies. Research Log 61. James spoke quickly into his recorder. I'm witnessing unprecedented cooperative behavior among Shadowclaws. They're using advanced battle tactics, coordinating their movements like a trained military unit. The poachers opened fire, their ships moving to surround the station, but they had never faced organized Shadowclaw resistance before. Usually, they hunted single creatures, using tricks and traps. This was different. Storm touched James's shoulder, then pointed to the station's weapon controls. The message was clear. He wanted James to help coordinate their defense. Council members, James called out, each of you take a station. The Shadowclaws will protect us from direct attacks. We need to support them with the station's weapons. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Council records. The Shadowclaws moved with incredible grace, their bodies absorbing energy weapons while their claws tore through ship hulls. James and the council members used the station's systems to create a network of defensive fire, protecting their allies and cutting off escape routes. Storm stayed in the command center with James, using his knowledge of poacher tactics to predict their movements. His claws flew over the control panels, adjusting shields and rerouting power with expert precision. They're trying to break through the left sector, James called out, spotting a group of ships moving together. Storm responded with another calling sound. 3 Shadowclaws immediately moved to intercept, working together to disable the ship's engines. The coordination between species was perfect, human tactical knowledge combining with Shadowclaw strength and speed. The poachers, realizing they were outmatched, attempted to retreat. But the Shadowclaws had predicted this. A new group of them emerged from the darkness behind the poacher fleet, cutting off their escape route. Attention poaching vessels, James broadcast on all frequencies. You are surrounded by Shadowclaw forces and a council station. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. One by one, the poacher ships went dark. The Shadowclaws moved in, carefully disabling their engines and weapon systems. Not a single ship escaped. Research Log 61 continued. James spoke, watching the Shadow Claws escort captured ships toward the station. Today marks not just a victory over criminals, but proof that different species working together are stronger than any force trying to divide them. Storm made a pleased sound, his body relaxing from its battle-ready state. He touched the screen showing the captured poacher fleet, then gestured to the council members who had fought beside them. The message was clear. This wasn't just about stopping criminals. This was about showing the galaxy that cooperation was possible, even between its most unlikely species. End of Part 6. 3 months after the battle at the research station, James stood before the full Galactic Council. The Great Hall was packed with representatives from every council species, but what made this meeting truly historic was the presence of Storm and 5 other Shadow Claws, their dark forms commanding attention at the center of the chamber. The evidence is undeniable, the head council member announced, her crystalline form reflecting light across the hall. The Shadow Claws have proven themselves to be not only intelligent but highly advanced. Today, we formally recognize them as a sovereign species. James watched with pride as Storm stepped forward. The Shadow Claw's movement was confident, his star-bright eyes scanning the gathered audience. No one showed fear anymore. Instead, there was respect and genuine interest. Our first act, the head council member continued, is to officially declare all Shadow Claw territories as protected space. The hunting permits are permanently revoked, and all imprisoned poachers will face strict punishment for their crimes against sentient species. Storm made a sound of approval, one that was echoed by his fellow Shadow Claws. James had spent the past months learning their language, discovering it was as complex and nuanced as any in the council. Furthermore, she said, we recognize the need for continued cooperation between our peoples. Therefore, we are establishing the first Joint Species Research and Protection Agency. James Walker, please step forward. James moved to stand beside Storm, just as he had that first day in the station. The Shadow Claw's body rippled with what James now knew was pride and friendship. Your actions have shown us that understanding between species requires more than just technology or protocols, the head council member said. It requires courage, compassion, and the willingness to look past our preconceptions. You will serve as the first director of interspecies relations, working alongside Storm, who has been chosen by his people as their representative. The chamber erupted in approving sounds from all species present. James caught sight of Dr. Blue in the audience, the same researcher who had left him behind at the station. She gave him a respectful nod. Research Log 100. James spoke, his voice carrying through the chamber. Today marks not just a change in law, but a change in understanding. The Shadow Claws have already begun sharing their knowledge with us. Their method of faster-than-light travel, their advanced sensing abilities, their deep understanding of space itself. All of this knowledge was available to us, if we had only tried to communicate instead of fear. Storm touched the control panel in front of him, activating the chamber's main display. Images appeared showing joint patrols of council ships and Shadow Claws working together, protecting space lanes from pirates and poachers. Other images showed new research stations being built, designed to accommodate both species comfortably. But perhaps most importantly, James continued, we've learned that strength comes in many forms. The Shadow Claws were not the monsters we imagined. They were guardians, protectors, and now, they are our allies. The head council member raised her hands for silence. Let this be a lesson to all species. Our fear and prejudice nearly cost us a valuable alliance. From this day forward, we will approach new species with open minds and peaceful intentions. Storm made a series of sounds, which James translated for the council. My people have watched yours for many cycles, hoping for this day. We protect the spaces between stars because all life deserves to exist freely. Now we protect it together. As the ceremony concluded, James looked around the chamber. Young representatives from various species were cautiously approaching the Shadow Claws, asking questions, showing curiosity instead of fear. In one corner, a group of scientists was already planning joint research projects with 2 Shadow Claws. Research Log 100, final entry. James said softly, Storm's familiar presence beside him. When I first encountered Storm, I was called foolish for trying to understand him. Now that moment of trust between two very different beings has changed the galaxy. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. There are more species out there, more mysteries to solve, more bridges to build. And now we know that with courage and compassion, anything is possible. Storm's rumble of agreement echoed through the chamber, a sound that once caused terror, but now brought hope. Together, Human and Shadowclaw looked out at their audience, living proof that the greatest discoveries come not from fear, but from understanding. End of Part 7.